Hi, welcome back everyone. In this session, this is the how we deploy a multi-thousand-seat VDI system in UK local government. It's presented by Andy Trevor. It's sponsored by Oregon. Over to you guys.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm not Andy Trevor. Andy Trevor is my beautiful assistant down here. He'll be taking over in a little while. My name's Andy Hall. I'm the Director of Product Management for Oracle's VDI product. And it's that product that Andy's going to be talking about in a little while. But just so we know who's here, can we have a quick show of hands? Who uses Oracle VDI today? Who's heard of Oracle VDI? Great. Who's heard of the latest release, 3.4, that came out maybe a few weeks ago? Okay, so it might be useful if you knew a little bit about that as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a real potted kind of history of what Oracle VDI is, just so that we've got a vocabulary from which Andy can then build on about a real-world deployment. So one of the big obstacles, if you go speak to the analysts, if you go and sit down with Brian or Gartner or IDC and you say to them, why hasn't VDI taken off? You know, the blue touch paper's been lit. Why hasn't it taken off? And one of the main obstacles today to why VDI hasn't been adopted whole scale is because it's just too complicated and it's too costly. And so Oracle's interest in VDI comes about because every enterprise we go into, there are two things in common, whether it's a blue chip multinational company, whether it's local government, whether it's federal government, whether it's a new startup. Every enterprise has got two things in common. They've got users and they've got applications. And all we're trying to do is join the applications with the users. If you sat through Brian's energetic session in just previous to this one, he was all about, it's about the apps. You have to deliver the apps. And it just so happens, an accident of history, that the desktop is simply a vehicle in which to deliver the enterprise applications. Now, Oracle, most people think Oracle is all about databases, but in actual fact, Oracle's strategy has been to build, is one of vertical integration. They've grown up and down below the database. So from the database, they bought BEA, they got middleware. From there, they bought the applications like PeopleSoft, Siebel, JD Edwards, because they wanted to be able to monetize the applications that was using their database. And then with the acquisition of Sun, they built below the database in that they had servers and storage beneath that as well. But how do you get all those great applications that Oracle has? And every enterprise today has got Oracle applications. How do you then deliver them to the users? And Oracle VDI is one way that you can do that. So traditionally, it's been too complicated to do that. So Oracle's VDI solution is all about being complete, open, and integrated. I guess Oracle are probably the only vendor in which you can build a VDI solution using bits from one vendor. So, whether it goes from like the storage, the servers, the virtualization technology, as well as the desktop applications and operating system here, all the way up to the device that sits in front of your eyes, Oracle is one of the few people that can deliver that. And the advantage you have in just a single stack from one vendor is that you've only got one throat to choke. And Andy will talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so traditionally what people have done when they've put together a VDI solution, if they've been out and they've bought servers and storage from vendors A, B, or C, bought the operating system from somewhere else, got the applications from somewhere else, and put it all together themselves. But Oracle's approach is that, look, let's try and produce one stack that's complete, but open, so you're not locked in there. If you want to swap out any of these particular layers, you can do that. If you want to deploy Oracle VDI on HP, you can do that. If you want to use Oracle VDI with, say, a VMware backend or a Citrix backend, you can do that. But we have our own virtualization technology as well. And then the integrated bit is about the fact that if you do use the one red stack, we've done some smart stuff in terms of the logic of how this all works together to accelerate how it all works. So just to kind of go through the vocabulary here, the front-end client device, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk briefly down the stack here. So at the top with the client device, what do we offer there? Oracle VDI comes with support for the Windows, Mac, Linux clients. We've got an iPad client, and we have these Sunray ultra-thin clients, which are no local operating system, just a piece of firmware. We're showing them downstairs at the booth. And Andy will talk a lot about them later. Some things that's kind of neat about Oracle VDI that other people maybe can't do is that we can do not only multiple desktops, multiple monitors, but we can do multiple desktops. Lots of our customers need not just Windows, but they need Windows and Ubuntu, or more specifically, they need Office applications, engineering applications, line of business applications, and they may be on different platforms. If you're going to, how you actually get the endpoint device to the back-end data center is over our own protocol called ALP. It's WAN optimized. It automatically identifies. The client shouts out in the network and says, hey, you know, who's going to manage me? And the back-end server can automatically can be found and can connect to the front-end device or the software client. And the reason why that's kind of compelling is we really don't want end users having to memorize URLs to connect to. So you just plug in these devices or start up your OVDC on your Mac or your Windows machine, and it automatically finds the back end. Some of the other stuff that we've done that's kind of interesting is that multimedia is always the big challenge for how you can deliver rich content. And so we've put some we've got a whole range of technologies to accelerate multimedia that range from intercept technologies, where you stick something into, say, the Windows desktop, to accelerate delivery of things like H.264, to a general purpose kind of acceleration, which is in our virtualization layer called VirtualBox. How many people have heard of VirtualBox? New version came out last night. So we've got some logic in the VRDB server that identifies areas of the screen on the server that says, that's video, that is video. So I'm going to switch to a different codec to deliver that down to the client than would normally be used for, say, 2D GDI type primitives. And the advantage of having it below the hypervisor level means that you can accelerate not just Windows desktops, but also Linux and Solaris desktops too. Because at the end of the day, the desktop is just a delivery vehicle for your applications. If you want to offer a choice of desktops to your users, you should be able to do that. And you should have as rich an environment on Linux or Solaris as you do on Windows. The broker itself, that's the kind of smarts of the outfit that kind of joins users to desktops. Hugely scalable, ties into your existing user authentication systems. You can have all the kind of usual kind of like persistent desktops, shared desktops. You can set up policies and for things like personal hard drives. So everyone may have the same kind of shared desktop, but what about your personalization data? We have something called personal hard drives that we map onto your shared desktop at runtime so that you always have your stuff with you, even though you may have just been given a newly minted desktop VM. Of course, all of this is powered by an Oracle database, as you might expect. The failover kind of, everyone has load balancing and failover within a data center, but because of the architecture using some of the clients, you can actually have data center failover as well. The client can know which data center to go to if the primary one is down. That's kind of cool. And then the applications, again, walking down this layer with applications here. Oracle VDI is the only desktop virtualization technology which is certified for Oracle applications. So if you recognize any of these things here, PeopleSoft, Siebel, Primavera, all of these guys, we're the only one on which we are, that the application is certified to run on Oracle VDI. Okay. I've said already that the desktops can be a wide range of platforms, Windows, Linux, Solaris. They can either be VMs or they can be user sessions using a back-end terminal server, for instance, if you really want to do that. And we have a pluggable hypervisor layer. We use VirtualBox as our default hypervisor layer, but if you've got an investment in some of the other guys, we can support that as well. And of course, when it gets down to the hardware layer, Oracle Sun or Sun historically have always been renowned for doing really fantastic hardware. And it ranges from like 1U systems all the way up to your big kind of blade systems as well. Finally, in the storage area, everyone knows that storage is the kind of the key area of VDI. If your storage isn't going to work, your VDI project's not going to work. And what we've just introduced with version 3.4 of VDI is some new options to support local storage, which is where basically you take one server, it could be Linux or Solaris server, you drop on the VDI software, and with that VDI software comes the hypervisor, it comes with the local storage technology, so your local VM virtual disks actually live on the file system of that server. So it's a very simple approach, obviously very cost effective and very high performance because you're talking to the local disks. But it does give you a bit of a problem in terms of persistent desktops. You can't have a persistent desktop here because what if this server goes belly up? Obviously, how do you move that over there? So for that reason, we have obviously shared file system usage. So that could be anything like an NFS or SMB kind of linkage there, which gives you a degree of resilience. And we also have, for high performance, the support for third-party iSCSI or NAS devices, where we talk iSCSI to those things. And then finally, our kind of high-end or Rolls-Royce kind of solution is our own storage technology, which is called the ZFS storage appliance. And the reason why that's so good is that it's the storage is HA capable, so it comes with kind of clustered controllers. It comes with shelves of disks, and everything is kind of redundant at various levels there. Efficiency, it's very efficient. It does online deduplication. And when things start to go wrong, it's got a great range of tools. So, that kind of 9 o'clock in the morning problem, or that problem where, there's a huge number of IOPS. I was talking to someone earlier today about a large customer of ours that had a problem because all of a sudden the storage seemed to be not responsive. And they were able to go in, use the analytics, analyze where the big IOPS spike was, narrow it down to a particular virtual machine, and find out what that virtual machine was going to do. And it turned out that that was a desktop that hadn't been refreshed for a couple of weeks. It had just downloaded and was running some kind of like mad antivirus definitions file. And so we were able to analyze and solve the problem very, very rapidly because of the analytics built into the storage. And in terms of those different storage options, I don't know if this shows up too well, but local storage and network file system is ideal for like just running up a quick proof of concept, maybe a pilot. If you guys are partners, you can now run up a complete server in a single box, leave it with the customer, come back 2 weeks later, see how they're getting on. They can taste and see using the kind of local storage and NFS kind of approach. But when they decide to press the button to go big, we recommend that they go to like a NAS type appliance for the reasons that we talked about. So just in summary here, I just wanted to basically say the Oracle pitch is really about we're the only vendor that can do the whole stack, and we're the only vendor on which Oracle applications are certified. We've got thousands of customers out there, but really what I want to do now is hand over to Andy to just talk about one customer and talk about a real world deployment, warts and all, and explain how his business solved the problems for them. Okay, Andy, you just want to put this on?
Excuse me, just need to get that in my back pocket. Thanks. Perfect. So pop that in your other pocket.
Cool. Nice one. Ciao. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Andy. Andy Trevor, Manager and Director, Cutter Project Limited. We're a desktop specialization company. We've been working with Sun, now Oracle, for a period of time. We're going to case study a large deployment that we've just finished, but we're going to kind of strip some of this back as well. There's an awful lot of focus on specific technologies and technology sets. We're going to go about the approach to deploying this successfully and working in conjunction with one of the larger vendors, Oracle. And then we'll go and have a look at the case study quickly, and then we'll go and do a Q&A session. Just a quick bit about us. We were founded in 2005. We started off with open source group hug hippie LTSB-based thin clients into UK education. Very soon into that, we were introduced to the Sunray technology that Andy's just brought up, and it's something that we embraced very, very quickly. And we've specialised since in primarily Sunray technology, but other vendors' technology as well, but I'm not allowed to talk about that because I'm here on Oracle's behalf. We're focused on service. One of the things that we found with thin client deployments and VDI deployments in the whole is there's been an awful lot of them been put in and then walked off by the experts, so-called vendors, etc., etc. They are quite maintenance intensive, and service around that is key to making these projects a long-term success. We like to see ourselves as a leading deployer of Oracle Sunray solutions. We've got an awful lot of experience. We've got an awful lot of customers all over the world now using the Sunray technology and Oracle VDI. we offer a number of services, consultancy, deployment support. We can also shift the tin. We do a lot of work with in-country partners, so Oracle partners that are in territory, primarily US, Middle East and Africa, who have got the distribution capability but don't particularly have the solution capability. We're award-winning for UK Education Trade Show 2011 at BET. We won the Environmental Sustainability Award for large-scale computing with inside education for the amount of carbon that we'd saved on deploying thin client solutions. And we've got a proven track record. This is done based over learning this stuff the hard way across a significant number of customers now. We're going to have a look at the approach to large-scale deployments. The last 2 years, we've seen so many failed VDI deployments, and there's an awful lot there out in the press about failed VDI deployments. And a lot of it we're finding is people are getting hooked up and focused on single points of the technology that's available out there. This is an exercise in expectation management. Successful VDI deployments are infrastructure projects, but they are expectation management projects, and you'll see that as a theme throughout all of this. 70% of the work that we do with a customer will be around expectation management, because if you get that bit right, you will understand how far this technology will fit into that organisation, therefore you will have a successful deployment. We'll look at the whole process of going through this: qualification, assessment, demo, design, POC, pilot, deployment. And this is something that we've stuck to throughout all of our processes now, and we found it to be very successful. Some of our competitors in the market, solution providers, are skipping out certain bits of this process, and as I say, we've spent time going around clearing up after them. Qualification, this has got to be done properly. This is where the foundation of a VDI deployment will go. And one of the things and one of the advantages that we've got is access through to Oracle's desktop team here within the UK and the Middle East, is they understand conceptually the process to go through to get this qualification done properly. They understand their technology well, but they also understand the end customer's user base as well, and working with them makes this a very easy deployment. Some of the other vendors that we're working with, they understand certain elements of their stack, but they don't understand the entire conceptual infrastructure side of the project that's going to go on. So challenges and objectives and technology and understanding. You've got to find out where the pain points are for your customers. The technology will come as you understand what those pain points are. And you've got to look at what their long-term objectives are. Again, there's an awful lot of short-term focus looking at VDI deployments, possibly because it's the cool technology on the block. You need to understand their current environment, and you need to understand their current infrastructure as well. There's been a number of occasions where we've turned up at sites that they've had VDI deployed, and there's been multi-server racks put in with 4 13-amp power supplies in the server room, etc., etc., etc. There's always challenges around deploying VDI in any environment. It's not a one-shoe-fits-all technology, and it's not the silver bullet that's going to solve world poverty. So you've got to understand the challenges and objectives that VDI is going to help them solve. The other important one, and you'll see this again, as I say, manage expectations. This is a huge expectation management process. He says, as is, technology issues already. During the assessment, desktop requirements, users king. As Andy said, people have kind of lost focus on the real reason for doing this, and user is king. Supplying them with the right tools to do the right job at the right time has got to be fundamental to whatever you do in this process. You need to understand their working practices, and those working practices are an ever-moving target at the moment because of bring your own device, working from home, everybody's expecting to do more with less, etc., etc. Key to where VDI fits is understanding that user's working practice, but more importantly, on top of that is their application stack. There are certain applications, as we all know, that will not fit well in a VDI environment. If you manage that expectation at the beginning and let them know it's not going to work, then you're not going to run into the problem. Is if you're trying to shoehorn the technology to fit stuff where it's not going to fit, is where you'll run into problems. Peripheral devices, under any of the VDI technologies, can cause problems. Not every single USB/serial peripheral device is going to work with every single thin client. So understanding the user's base of peripherals is important. And doing a detailed analysis of the environment. There's a lot of guys out there that are doing analysis-based software. I think there's 2 here now, Liquidware and Centrix. Very, very good bits of kit. Very useful in doing a large-scale top-down assessment of what's going on. There is no substitute for human information. There is no substitute for interacting with the core user base within the establishment that you're working with to make sure that you know what they want, when they want, and how they want. Again, that information gathering user is king type scenario. And then you can go back and identify the relevant technologies. Not everybody's VDI stack is going to fit. One thing that's good with the Oracle stack is, as Andy said, it's soup to nuts. You've got the capability of doing an awful lot, and there is an awful lot of flexibility within that stack. And that proved to be quite critical to the customer that we've just finished this large-scale deployment for, is having one throat to choke, which is always nice instead of having to phone up 15 people when it's gone wrong, but actually having the flexibility of the openness of what Oracle can provide with the ability to use different storage devices, the ability to have different desktops available, the availability of different types of client connection devices was very, very important. Demo the solution. Again, we've seen this, and I'm sure you guys see it at trade shows and tech shows. The solution's demoed, and it's fantastic. It's all bells and whistles, and it's all actually smoke and mirrors sat in the background. Demo it as you're expecting it to be seen by the customer in real-world deployment. As I say, this is all about expectation management. Don't stoke the fire with giving them something that actually is not going to be real in production. Don't talk about yet to be released features with a time frame and a time scale. It's something that does frustrate me a little bit with Oracle because they don't roadmap, but I understand exactly why they do it. It's so that that expectation of something down the road is not set and you buy on that expectation. Be careful with talking about not released features, and the Oracle guys will back me up on that one. Involve your key stakeholders. And where I say key stakeholders, it's not just IT departments, it's not just finance departments, it's everybody within the layered structure that are going to be affected by VDI need to be engaged. They need to understand the reasons behind what you're doing, they need to understand the implications of what you're doing, and they have to have their expectation management. There is a fundamental change in the way your desktop computing will be delivered. Therefore, that needs to be engaged with all levels that will be touched and affected by this. And there is soft things outside that as well, like HR departments. They'll be affected by the moves around here. They'll be affected because the nature of the working environment may change, more people working from home, etc., etc. So where I say it's an infrastructure project, it's also an entire organisation project. Everybody will be affected by large-scale desktop change move to VDI from fat client PCs. Start looking at the design early. It'll identify those infrastructure questions. Like, have you got enough power? Is your data center big enough? Do you have enough bandwidth? It will start getting an idea of cost. One of the things that we found quite regularly is people are talking about VDI, and it's the cool technology on the block, but when you start putting numbers in front of them, they start possibly questioning whether they've got the business case to do it. Work with them at the beginning to get the business case as well, and it will steer you a deployment approach, and it will also sort out your sizing. It is a constantly moving target, and I mean day-to-day moving target on the large-scale deployments as well. Proof of concept is key. Again, I said we've cleared up after an awful lot of deployments recently where proof of concepts haven't been done. People have bought kit on the whim of a sales guy. Identify a diverse user base. Again, it's all about managing expectations. You've got to touch as many people within the organisation that are going to be affected by this as possible. Identify your critical applications and peripherals. That will give you an idea of how deep into the organisation you're going to be able to push thin client VDI computing. Define success criteria. Again, is something that we found has been missed quite regularly. And POCs, pilots can all kind of creep off in all kinds of weird and wonderful directions. You've got to make sure if you're engaging with a company like us or you're doing it internally, that the teams involved have got specific success criteria defined, or will drift off into the distance. And again, that drops into identifying a timeline as well, is don't let it creep. Set a timeline, set your success criteria and work towards it. Again, back to no smoke and mirrors. In the POC, it's got to be as close to how it will be in reality as you possibly can. There's no point in pulling the wool over the user's eyes by giving them something in the proof of concept that they're not going to see in reality. Again, as you can see, in red, manage the expectations. Same with the pilot. It may not be needed. It depends on how big the deployment's going to be. Some people are quite happy to jump from proof of concept to deployment. The case study that we're going to go over shortly, they went for a large-scale pilot because the organisation was so big, and then we were looking at putting so many desktops into that environment that a pilot needed to be carried out. The proof of concept wasn't going to be enough. During that process, identification of the internal champions, there is a fundamental shift change in the way you're going to deliver your desktop computing. In one hand, you're taking stuff away. You've got to be seen to be giving stuff back. And the internal champions will be the people that drive that to the rest of the user base as well. So is identify those internal champions and work with them to assist you with doing the change management. Expectation management's now moving into change management. And you know what it's like when users are given something and it changes, they get a little bit upset about stuff. Again, extend the user base, try and get it to touch as many people as possible. Again, success criteria, manage your expectations. A lot of this will seem obvious, and you'll be sat there thinking, well, yeah, that makes sense. You'll be surprised how many people don't go through these kind of processes when they're looking at deployments. Review the design. As I say, it's an ever-moving target, and things will be pulled out from the POC and pilot that will dictate how that final deployment's going to look. Key is to identify the project teams from all parties, and that includes independent software vendors as well. Some of the software that's key and critical to the organisation's working practices may or may not fit particularly well inside a VDI environment. Therefore, engagement with those ISVs needs to be done early to make sure that you've got the support, should it be needed, through the deployment. Make sure your schemes of work and scope of work are tight. We've seen so many deployments where there's just been massive scope creep. And you're on a losing battle if you've got scope creep, because you just can't keep up with technology, thinking, and expectations. So make sure that those schemes of work are tight. Building contingency time. This always takes longer than expected. Every single project we've been involved with has taken more time than the customer originally expected. And it's normally because knock-on effects from things like ISVs, application management, application assessment, and things like that have extended the time. So build in some contingency time. Something will throw a spanner in the works, and you will have to sit down and work your way around it. None of these deployments are ever straightforward and simple. If they are, we'd all be doing them by now. With the large complex deployments, ensure you've got vendor cover. Oracle are very good at this. See, I've been nice to you guys. It's critical, and it's one of the things that's held us through the last few large-scale deployments that we've done, is knowing that we've got Oracle engineering and Oracle support in the background, literally lifting a phone and we're straight through to the guys. It is a complex system to deploy, and having vendor support, close vendor support, is critical during the process. We'll move on to the case study. We'll give you an overview, objectives and challenges, design side of things, and it's a lightweight overview of the design. I'd need my Chief Technical Officer and Engineering Manager here to do the full design, because it was, again, pretty complex. We'll go through the approach, which is no different to what we've just spoken about, really, and outcome, and then we'll look at the summary and lessons learned on that side of it. Overview. Borough Council, not too far away from here. Can't mention any names at the moment, but I'm sure people will be able to find out fairly quickly. One of their drivers behind the project was their estate was getting old and creaky, and they were needing to move from XP to Windows 7 to make sure that they were in a position security-wise for when XP support died. They identified early on that most of their existing PC estate wasn't going to run Windows 7, so therefore they were looking at alternatives. As we're all aware, and most of us are sat here in this set of presentations for the same reason, traditional desktop is getting to a point where it's unwieldy, unmanageable and unsustainable. Therefore, VDI was looked at. And the reason they looked at Oracle was one throat to choke. It was a huge factor in them deciding to go down this route, was the fact that they only had to chuck one rock at one window. Actually, it was lots of rocks at one window, but it was a key driver behind it. They've got 4,000 plus workers. However, their normal user base is between 2,500 on a daily basis. But the flexibility of what they were trying to achieve was going to lead to more of those 4,000 workers having access to IT. And having the flexibility of the stack that Oracle provided, again, was part of the key to them making this decision, is the fact that you can work from home over a Java-enabled web browser with secure global desktop. You've got Sunrays inside the building, so they've got the thin clients that they can use there quite happily. They've got OVDC that sits on iPad, so through their VPN system, they can access their desktop on an iPad. There's the chance of reprovisioning old machines that may have got 1 or 2 years life left in them, and it had been silly to throw them away. They've got multiple sites, and it's one of the things that we found with the Sunray and Oracle VDI technology is working over multiple sites with the ability to move desks with smart card is one of the key drivers behind people liking the Sunray technology. And if you guys haven't seen it, it's worth going down to the Oracle booth downstairs and getting good Mr. Knight at the back there to give you a demo on how the card switching and things work. It's very good. They've got a really diverse user base, from somebody that may log on for no more than 10 or 15 minutes a day, right the way through to some top quality power users that are doing all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. And the assessment process that was gone through to identify those was quite intense, to make sure that the right technology was put in the right place at the right time. They're looking at more home and remote workers, and this is something that we're finding more and more prevalent throughout local government, is people are wanting to shut down buildings because buildings are expensive. So they are reducing the amount of real estate and increasing the density of users, but also giving them the ability to work from home stroke remotely. And hot desking is part of that key strategy, and that's something that the Sunray technology does extremely well. As I say, the idea was to replace the majority of the desktops with Windows 7 onto thin client. One of the big challenges was assessing the application suitability for the Windows 7 migration. At local government, this is something that we're finding to be quite a long and labour-intensive process. When we tipped up to talk to these guys about their Windows 7 application testing, they'd only just started it, and they had 400 applications that they needed to make sure worked on inside Windows 7. So there was an awful lot of testing and support and head scratching about looking at their application base. And interestingly, one of the things that's done, and we're finding this quite regularly as well, is this Windows 7 migration is an opportunity to do a rationalization of your application stack. A lot of your users say, I've got to have that. I've got to have it working. Well, when was the last time you actually logged on and used it? 2009. You really, really do need that then. So there was a consolidation exercise went through with their application stack, and there was a reasonable amount that was shaved off from that side of it. One of the other objectives is they're currently a Novell house. They've got eDirectory in place, and they're looking at moving across to a complete Microsoft Active Directory system, including Office 365. Some of the challenges around that was the new system's going to have some reliance on the old system for the foreseeable future, which meant that we've got to be able to integrate with both sides of things. The migration process is complex, and because of the size of the organisation, that it can all be done at once as well. So we had to take that into account on how we did things. And again, one of the flexible, or some of the flexibility that's offered by the Oracle VDI stack allowed us to sit on both environments and provide desktop sat in both environments while they went through that migration process and did some of their testing as well. Another key driver, and these are all drivers that everybody's well familiar with inside thin client computing and VDI, is increasing the manageability. They wanted to reduce the complexity. Now, it kind of goes against what we've said earlier, that this is a very complex solution to deploy. It's complex in the stack of technology, but actually it should make the end user side of things, or the day-to-day administration of the end user side of things, less complex. And it seems to have done that. They seem to be very pleased with that. And from a personal point of view inside the company, the core of the desktops that we've got scattered over the world, around about 15,000 under management on a day-to-day basis, is looked after by 3 engineers. So at one engineer to every 5,000 desktops. Consolidation of images. again, this is a driver behind looking at VDI, is all the disparate amounts of hardware that are kicking around and the different images you need to keep those in a working state. There were identified something like 25 different builds of PCs within the organisation. And one of the things that we needed to do was reduce that down and look at the minimum number of templates, and we'll go over how we did that in a bit. Simplification of application deployment, another one that everybody's looking at. ATV, ThinApp, all the bits and pieces, the guys downstairs with Sense. The aim was to go for 100% non-persistent desktops. As soon as you start throwing persistent desktops into a VDI mix, you get into all kinds of issues with backing up, availability, etc., etc. So the aim within any VDI deployment, from our point of view, as far as we can see at the moment, is to go as close to 100% non-persistent desktops as you can. They are throwaway, disposable commodity items, and that will get rid of some of your management headaches. They needed to add flexibility to the working practices, but we needed to take in that home and remote workers were going to be key fundamental to this. Multiple device type access was what they wanted. They came to us with iPads, Android tablets, laptops, MacBooks, and said, we want it all to work. Now, we're nearly there. We're not quite there at the moment because the Android tablets don't work, and that will sort itself out as soon as Oracle and Google stop bitching at each other. And we'll get an OVDC client for Android. But as for the rest of it, we've got Linux laptops that can connect. We've got MacBooks, Windows laptops. There's an awful lot of iPads being deployed within the council environment now. But the other thing was also to maintain security. And this is a big headache now for everybody involved in deploying large-scale flexible working strategies, security maintenance, especially within local government organisations where there's quite a lot of sensitive data kicking around. We needed to look at how we maintain the security side of things. They wanted to know the expansion costs, so we needed to design a system with a kind of Lego brick approach, and that dictated what the final solution looked like. There could have been some significant tweaks in the back end side of things should they have wanted to go down a different direction, but they wanted to go, right, I need to deploy another 100 desktops, how much is it going to cost me? And they wanted that consistent throughout the process, not at the point where you got to 500 desktops and then suddenly had to deploy another 50,000 quid's worth of storage. They wanted 100, 100, 100, 100. They wanted to increase the return on investment. One of the big things that we've always liked about Sunray is since its inception 12 years ago now, something like that, we've got Sunray 1, Sunray 2 and Sunray 3. I've still got customers that have got 12-year-old Sunray 1s sat on their desks, and you wouldn't know the difference between that and a new Sunray 3, other than it's a bit grubby and it's not the prettiest thing in the world, and the new ones are nice, white and shiny. The longevity of the device was critical to what they wanted to do. Estimated mean time between failure on a Sunray 3 now, 220,000 hours. I plan to be retired way before one of those dies. So that side of it was also key, to break out of that normal refresh cycle of every 3, 4, 5 years. They wanted some spare capacity built in within the budget. We managed to do that. One of the reasons they're looking at doing this is because of the flexibility of the Oracle VDI stack, with being able to configure additional companies within the core infrastructure. They're looking at potentially selling out some of these services to other parts of the larger council organisations that they work with. So they're looking at getting some of their money back on that, and that's one of the things that we found very useful within Oracle VDI. Assess application suitability for Windows 7 migration. I've got a feeling this is still going to be going on in 6 months' time. We're on a phased rollout program with these guys. I think we're looking at about 50 to 80 users a day. And some of it is down to the fact that all the application side of things still haven't been tested. There's an awful lot of work still to be done there. And yes, there is technology out there that makes it easier. Yes, we are using some of it, but it's still a long and laborious process. AppV is being used quite heavily, as we'll see later on. And there are challenges based around that. The bit at the bottom about maintaining security, they've got government extranet systems, so we need to meet government requirements without persistent desktops being used. And again, the flexibility of the Oracle VDI stack has allowed us to do pretty much that without having to deploy persistent desktops, which lead into more backup problems and recovery issues. The approach we took, pretty much the same. We didn't do the demo, actually. Fine gentleman sat at the back there, did the demo. It was an Oracle one, and there wasn't too much smoke and mirrors, so we'll let them off on that side of it. There was a model office put together where they ran a proof of concept, and then we went into a pilot deployment. And the pilot deployment actually was quite a long pilot. It ran for best part of 5 months. And during that process, there was a huge amount of testing done around diverse users, application, flexibility, disaster recovery, and then right at the very end, before they decided to go and place the order for all of the kit, it was put under heavy load testing against critical apps. And that was done by using Oracle Virtual Desktop Client, fired up 200 times on a couple of laptops with auto IT scripting running in the background, launching, interacting, shutting down applications, and the servers were run at 100% capacity for 2 weeks with no breaks, no downtime at night or anything. They were absolutely caned flat out for 2 weeks solid, just to make sure that we were comfortable it was ready to go, Oracle were comfortable that it was ready to go, and more importantly, the council were confident that the technology was robust enough and stable enough. It took an absolute pummeling, and it came through out the other side. The council carried out a lot of the application modelling and user and application profiling. They understand, and it goes back to the point that you can run a lot of this automated software, but there's no substitute for the user knowing their user base better than you do and better than the software does. And there was a lot of time invested by the customer to go and do the user and application profiling. And actually during that process, there were a number of user types that were identified as non-suitable for VDI, and they're going to stay on fat clients. We've actually got it down to, I think there's only about 300 fat clients going to remain across the entire organisation out of 4,000 devices. So that's pretty good going. We engaged with the suppliers of the critical applications. Communication is king, and this is one thing that we're finding when these projects start to break down, is people stop talking to each other. Or when you run into problems, people stop talking to each other and people get very, very defensive. Communication is king to these being a successful deployment. Make sure that you keep the project rolling by talking to everybody involved. Quick overview of the design. We've got 4 racks of servers and storage based in the council's on-site data center. We've put a broker layer in there of 7 1U rack-mounted servers, and they will do all of the brokerage for Sunray, and they'll provide the SGD brokerage layer behind the application gateways, which we'll talk about in a minute. Hypervisor layer, 36 1U rack-mounted servers, Sun X4170 M2s, fully loaded with 144 gig of RAM and 2 6-core processors. Each one of those boxes is designed to take around about 100 users. And during the pilot testing phase with most of their critical applications, we were sat at between 100 and 104 users per box. And then the storage layer are 36 individual 7120 ZFS storage appliances. Now, this is where the design was put like this because of the Lego brick model required by the council, is being able to pick up units of 100 and deploy them. They'll actually take around about 150 desktops, possibly even more, actually, depending on how well you've optimized your Windows templates. But we've kind of built it, 1 storage, 1 server, 1 storage, 1 server, so they know the expansion model. And we could have combined those into larger 73 series, 74 series server, storage devices with multiple trays of disks, but it's not what the council wanted at the time. We've got a little bit of remote access in there, starting now to be used very, very heavily. We've got Oracle Secure Global Desktop. We've got 2 gateway servers, which are effectively reverse proxies sat in the DMZ that then point back into the main SGD servers actually inside the LAN. We're running 2-factor authentication on that side of it. And the 2-factor authentication is done by Secure Envoy. We've got Cisco VPN concentrator for iPad connectivity and also for remote Sunrays, where there's 2 or 3 Sunrays in a couple of remote offices. The Sunray itself, inside its firmware, has got the ability to be programmed for VPN to talk to either Cisco or Juniper firewalls. And there's a test and dev server in there to do sandboxing and all kinds of bits and pieces. Networking has been a real big headache on this project because of GCSX security requirements, the council's requirement to have as much failover, redundancy and resiliency as possible, and just the nature of some of the networking in place there was a bit old and a bit creaky, and also a lot of the other core network was being replaced at the time the VDI project was going on, which led to some interesting things. So we've got a client access layer. So exposed to the corporate user LAN, there's a small number of servers. Effectively, it's those broker servers and the SGD server, the gateway servers that are exposed to the corporate LAN. To keep that footprint as small as possible. We've got the storage layer, which is physically and logically separate. It can be accessed directly via the hypervisor, and the client layer will access it for a little bit of command and control. Hypervisor layer, only the storage layer can talk to that side of it. It's isolated off, it's got its own switching stack, and it keeps the traffic away from ruining everything else. Because the hypervisor to storage traffic profile is pretty high. It does tend to cane your network a wee bit. Then you've got your virtual desktop layer. The actual Windows 7 images we've kept in small subnets, and they're sat on .1 key trunk VLANs. The idea was to avoid mixing network traffic as much as possible. It aids in troubleshooting, and it's also good security. The whole system's been split into 7 desktop providers. Now, the concept of a desktop provider inside Oracle VDI is a desktop provider is a certain amount of hypervisor and a certain amount of storage allocated to do a certain task. So it's a little container. What we've done is broken it down into 7. There's 6 multi-purpose ones, which fits in with the council's way of breaking down their user base into business units. And then there's one separate one for the GCSX user base, which has got its own security requirements. There is the capability to take pretty much any single component out of that for maintenance without affecting the overall stability of the system. We've got a small number of golden images, templates in use. The idea was to try and get it down to 1. But it wasn't going to go that far. I think we've got it down to 6 now. The core applications are deployed on the template, and the remainder are coming out via an AppV read-only cache. So the model and approach that we've taken with the council is you've got your golden template that all users have got the base on. It's been built by SECM, and that's got all the applications that every single user has access to on there. Then each of the business units will have business unit specific applications, and they've got another template generated from the golden template with that business unit specific app set on there. And then the remainder of the applications are deployed via AppV read-only cache, where there's certain access. There's 20 Visio licenses or 10 project licenses, etc., etc. The idea is actually probably the bulk of this layer here, other than the GCSX layer, will be removed, and everything's going to go and sit in a read-only cache with AppV. We've done a lot of testing with the read-only side of AppV, and the impact on the back-end storage is negligible, where with 100% disposable desktops on non-persistent side of things, streaming applications, the impact it was putting on the back-end storage was significant, and it was reducing the density per storage box by anything between 30 and 50%, which is why we've stuck with the read-only cache side of things. So what we've ended up with is a central infrastructure in their central data center, with 3,300 general purpose workers and the 300 GCSX secure workers. There are about to be 300 more deployed into a second data center, which will service probably the library system or the number of libraries that they've got around that require desktop computing in, but it will also then be looked at to be used as a DR center as well. We've got now a significant number more mobile workers with laptops and iPad access, and iPads are getting rolled out, I think, as quick as the desktops at the moment, so they've obviously got plenty of money. Web-based access from home with SGD and secure Envoy, given the two-factor authentication. And this is one of the big advantages, again, that we found is with the Oracle VDI stack is the persistency of that user session. You can be sat in front of your Sunray, working away quite happily. You can pull your card out. You can go to one of the other buildings, put your card in, carry on where you left off. You can pull that card out, put it in your pocket, go home. Log in with Secure Global Desktop from your home PC and carry on working exactly where you left off. You can close that session, come back in the morning, put your card in and carry on again exactly where you left off. And that's been one of the critical things for the council is consistency of user environment and consistency of work environment, and the mobility of that work environment is deploying what they need, when they need it, wherever they need it, and doing it 100% reliably. And integrated into that now, they're looking at their door access systems as well. So the smart cards will be combined smart chip for the Sunrays, RFID for their door access, and I think they've got their printing coming on it as well very shortly. So they've got full follow me printing. It's been a successful deployment. I've got not a lot of hair left. The design was a constant moving target. It evolved throughout the whole process of this. And this is where I go back to expectation management and communication. You've got to keep that channel open all the time because things do change. The flexibility of OVDI is outstanding. The layer of control that you've got because you've got Solaris sat between the hypervisor layer and the zero client end user device is phenomenal. Your imagination, our coding skills, you can pretty much do anything you want with it. It is seriously, seriously clever. And everything you need is pretty much within the product already. The councils originally didn't want much multimedia. That kind of changed pretty quickly during the project. They now want multimedia. It's not something that we've had to go out and redesign. It's not something that we've had to go out and buy in another piece of technology to do. It's there inside it. All we've done is turned it on. We've gone from using MSRDP to using the VRDP technology with inside VirtualBox. And I know there's people that sit around going, well, you're not using a bare metal hypervisor. No, you're right. They're not. But there are some real advantages to not using that bare metal hypervisor. And VirtualBox has got some seriously cool stuff. The rapidly changing areas, the VRDP technology is really, really good. Very, very flexible. It took an awful lot longer than expected. As I say, that goes back to design being a moving target. The GCSX requirement actually came up last week. And because of the flexibility of the Oracle VDI stack, we were able to react within 48 hours to give them the security that they required to allow that GCSX connection to go. There was a set of rules that came out that had been cleared by the council with government that we could do it this way. That rug was pulled well and truly from under everybody's feet last week, and we were given warning on Wednesday that it needed to be live on Friday. There was no major redesign required, and the flexibility of the Oracle VDI stack allowed us to do that very, very quickly. But it will take longer than expected, large-scale deployments. Little ones, 200, 300, 400 seats, they're not that problematic. Multiple 1,000-seat deployments are interesting. Nay hair. All the stakeholders need to be involved, and this is something that we learned actually the hard way with the council. We thought we had the stakeholder stack pretty much squared away, but actually how deep the implications of this deployment went to within the council infrastructure were a lot bigger than they were expecting and a lot bigger than we were expecting, which is why I go back to a few slides ago where it's make sure you've identified the key stakeholders and get them engaged early. It will save a lot of pain and effort making sure that everybody is on program, or however it's described these days. And back to the overlying expectation management is key. You've got to sit and work with the customer base, the user base, continually managing that expectation. As 70% of the time we spend on these deployments is done in expectation management. The technology side of it is reasonably easy, whether it be Oracle VDI, whether it be VMware View, whether it be Citrix. The actual technology stack and playing with the geeky stuff is easy. It's the understanding conceptually of what they want to achieve and manage the expectation to the path of getting that achieved without annoying the end user base, because the end user base are what matter. If they can't do what they're supposed to do, then you've failed. I think that's it. I think we're in question time. Anybody got any questions?
Will this fit in with a biometric authentication system, or is it just card?
Is there biometrics available for logging on and off Sunrays at the moment, Mr. Knight?
Yeah, there are some supported biometric devices that will work. Authentication probably would be
And again, this is one of the things that we found. It may be a case of we're not sure about that, but because of the flexibility of the stack that's involved, there's real capability to go away and do some playing and some testing to say, well, we're not sure at the moment, but we could play with this. We've done an awful lot with a number of customers where they've come and said, can we do this with it? And we've gone, we're not sure that we can. And then we've gone away and thought about it, and we've gone, oh, hold on a second. And then we've talked to these guys, and they've gone, oh, that's not a bad idea. And we've had a bit of a play, and we've gone back and gone, yes, now we can do it. And that's the flexibility that's given having either that Linux or Solaris layer in there that some of the other systems don't have. They're much more closed than the Oracle system is. In some respects, that's quite good because it's a little bit easier and there's less options, but it doesn't give you the flexibility to go round corners where a customer goes, well, what about, can I have all my desktops upside down? Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, we know how to do that.
Sorry, can you use the mic, please?
Have I broken this?
Was there any kind of push to say, why are we doing VDI, why don't we use terminal services?
Yeah, and that's one of the big pushes that we get in a lot of the deployments that we're talking to customers about at the moment. It was identified early on, actually, that remote desktop services, because of the amount of bizarre legacy apps that they had, wasn't going to fit this council deployment. We've done another one further up north that they've gone for remote desktop services. We think we're going to get 70% of their users on RDS, but they've just come back going, yeah, we're struggling now. We need probably 200 or 300 seats of VDI. So it's part of that initial expectation management side of things. And I know the original engagements, there was discussion around RDS, but the council decided that they needed the flexibility of a full VDI stack for this one.
So when you did the application assessments and all that at the beginning, you determined that...
There was some stuff tested on RDS, but the customer actually made that. It was put in front of them that you could reduce a lot of your cost by going for remote desktop services. They were adamant they wanted to go down VDI for the full stack, actually.
So have they bought 4,000 concurrent licenses, or...?
They've bought 3,600 device licenses for VDI, I think. I'm not sure. Oracle doesn't do concurrent. Yeah, you can have that argument with the Oracle people at the back. Nothing to do with me. Sorry, was that?
Could I just add to that? This concept of desktop providers that Andy talked about within Oracle VDI, it's okay to mix and match. You could have a desktop provider that was an RDS server, and you could have a desktop provider that was a full-on virtual machine hypervisor. Because there's going to be classifications of users for whom they're using simple applications and terminal service within it. So it's okay to do that, and you can partition them by using, for instance, either LDAP or Active Directory queries to basically say the guys in Liverpool that are using, that are in the marketing department, they should have these applications, whereas everyone else should have something else.
And it can all be managed centrally from a single environment. And the other thing is you've got, again, it's part of that freedom of choice thing. You're not limited to having VirtualBox as the hypervisor. There's support for ESX, there's support for Hyper-V in there as well. So you can bring in small existing test deployments of said technology and manage the whole lot from within the Oracle VDI stack as well, including remote desktop services and individual point-and-shoot connections, RDP to PC, if you've got some specialist PCs that still need to be working. So there's some real flexibility in that side of it. Yes, sir.
Not sure if you can disclose that information, but could you give a rough idea on the operational costs of that solutions of the 3,300 desktops per month? Rough idea without the Microsoft costs?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I really don't know. The transactions of shipping all the tin and everything was not done by us. All the professional services and all the support have been done by us, but the actual hardware licensing transactions have been done with these guys.
Okay.
It wasn't cheap.
That would be interesting to get the
Yeah.
benchmark value.
Yeah, and again, this is one of the things that we're finding. People start looking at VDI and find it a fascinating subject, and it's the cool one to go and do, and then they start investigating all the peripheral costs around it. Microsoft Office licensing, Microsoft VDA licensing. Oh, my application vendor there doesn't have a licensing model that supports VDI, and then everything starts getting incredibly complicated. And I think one of the big things that's holding back VDI from being large-scale taken-ups, not the cost of the technology, it's all the hoops that have got to be jumped through with Microsoft to make sure that your environment is licensed properly. And let's face it, who here thinks their entire environment is 100% squeaky clean licensed? And who have you asked on that? Because I've asked the same bloke at Microsoft the same question on 2 different days and got 2 wildly different answers. Same bloke. And he's their licensing expert on VDI. So I don't think anybody is 100% squeaky clean. Nothing I've come across so far is absolutely squeaky clean.
The rules are not even that 100% clean.
Was there any temptation on the customer's part to retain some of those PCs as endpoint devices, or was that just?
Yeah, some of them have been retained. Not so many in this deployment, but one of the other deployments that we're working on at the moment, reprovisioning of those old devices is fairly high on the list, and we're starting to see that again become apparent. When I first started Cutter back in 2005, most of the work we were doing was around reprovisioning old PCs, and then suddenly the trend for doing that just dropped off. But the last 12 months we've seen it start to accelerate. In the last 6 months it's accelerated rapidly. A lot of the customers that we're working with in the Middle East at the moment, reprovisioning of old machines is king to what they want to do, because they need to get 2 or 3 more years life out of that end user device to make sure that they're getting their return on investment, but they need the flexibility of having some kind of virtual desktop, be it RDS or a VDI desktop accessed at the back end to control the user base. And it's a natural point of migration as well. The big bang step from VDI and thin client away from traditional fat client, it's my PC, I've got my MP3 collection on there, can be quite traumatic for some users. So it's a decent way to start doing that gradual migration. And it means you can dip your toe in the water as well without investing huge amounts of money and then realising you made a catastrophic mistake. Yeah, sorry, there's a number of ways of reprovisioning the old machines. You've got access through from a cut-down workstation with a Java-enabled web browser to use Oracle's secure global desktop, which gives you access to either applications being published or a full desktop. But you've also got Oracle Virtual Desktop Client, which will sit on Mac, Linux, and Windows. And one of the ways we're doing it is we've built a little appliance that can either Pixie boot and fire straight into Oracle Virtual Desktop on a little cut-down Linux kernel, or you can install it onto the hard drive and just have it automatically launch. And that will then give you full access into either your RDS or your VDI environment. So reprovisioning machines is reasonably easy these days.
I've got the mic. So did you have to do much design around printing requirements?
Their printing actually was already in place and it was already quite robust, and they'd already decided to kind of decouple all of it from the desktop environment and have it as a centralized kind of follow-me printing environment. So printing in environments can be quite tricky. One of the good things that the Sunray technology's got is the ability to hang your local printers off the back of your Sunrays, and it's reasonably effective. I wouldn't say it's 100% successful, but it's reasonably successful. But what we're finding is more of the large scale, and a lot of the education customers have got central network printing environments, and it may be a handful of small printer or small number of users that have got local printer requirements and things. So most of it's now centrally managed.
Sorry, this is not a full question, but are they getting custom-made cards to have their Doric tree, their Sunray, and their printing follow-me in the same?
I'm not sure who's supplying them actually. Traditionally, we use somebody like Universal Smart Cards to do that job where you've got multiple functions required on a smart card. You can buy off-the-shelf smart cards to work with Sunray, Payflex. Christ, the list's about that long. And actually, my chief technical officer used to work for Sun. He was about badge number 15 in Sun UK, and he's done a lot of work with that structure, that pretty much anything that's got a smart chip on it, we can hack it in the background to make it work. But yeah, micro payflex, but if you've got specific requirements where you need a mixture of magnetic strip, RFID, go and talk to one of the smart card manufacturers to do it properly. And this is where I say it's an infrastructure project as well, is if you're looking at bringing in all those technologies, you've got to make sure that all of those bits are going to fit in with what you're doing on the desktop side of it, and the desktop's going to fit in on that side of it. And smart cards seems to be the one thing that makes everybody trip over, is they go, well, we've got this one, oh bugger, I can't get that one to work, because that won't work with a door access system. So you end up walking around with about 5 different cards. So that's why I'm saying it's an infrastructure project. And the implications outside of just the desktop are actually quite significant, and they need to be looked at as part of that project as well.
Andy, I was going to ask you why the council chose to do blocks of 100.
They wanted to know their expansion costs for those blocks of 100. They wanted it to be linear expansion. What they didn't want was, we can add 100, 100, 100, and it's going to cost 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. But at the 400 user mark, there's 50 grand's worth of storage needs to go in, and then you need to do something else. So we couldn't get it completely linear, but we got it as close to being linear as we could, so it can be deployed in blocks of 100, and that's pretty much the reason behind it. And I think some of the mentality behind that is they are looking at selling these services out to other departments, and they'll be able to understand what that department's density requirements will be and go, okay, then you're wanting to have 100 users come in, our buy price for those 100 users is, we'll sell it to you for that. So they'll know what their ongoing running costs are, so they can price their services accordingly along that side of things. I think it's pretty fair judgment, isn't it, John? One of the reasons they looked at that.
Yeah, sorry, I've got one more question, which is, when you were connecting to the government secure network,
Yes.
did you actually have to physically separate the hardware?
Right. I don't know the full answer on this one, because it was my engineering boys that went and did this. Originally, we were told we could do it by creating a separate VLAN and locking that VLAN away within one of the general purpose desktop providers. As I understand it now, one of the desktop providers has been split from 6 hypervisors and 6 storage into 3 hypervisors, 3 storage general purpose, and then the remaining 3 of each box has been put into desktop provider 7, which has then been secured away in some format, which I can't tell you at the moment, but I could do if my chief technical officer was here, because he fixed it a couple of days ago. But there was an extra degree of separation that was required. I think so. Oh, there's a. Say again, sir. Actually, it's part of the process that we're still working with them on at the moment, is to understand what the recycling policy for the main desktop pools are going to be. And that's an ever-moving target as well, and that's something that will evolve over the next 6 months, I'm sure, because they're still doing an awful lot of template rebuilding, because they're deploying more and more apps. As more and more apps have been tested and certified, ready to go, the bulk of the desktops are getting recycled in the evenings. As the new template has been sandboxed, tested, certified for deployment, we're blowing most of it away. But the flexibility of being able to blow away, I don't know, 2,500 desktops pretty quickly and re-provision them with a cup of tea watching the cricket is definitely the way forward, that's for certain. But that's something that's going to evolve. Yeah, I reckon there's probably 6 months worth of work to evolve the full desktop recycling policy within the council environment.
Okay, we've got one more question if anyone wants one. More questions, anyone?
Back here.
Wait for the mic or yell, sir.
Wait for the mic, please.
Taking into account all the things you just said about the licensing costs and the time it's taken you to do this, would you do VDI again, or would you do all management?
I'll do VDI all day, because that's what my business is built on, sir. Whether the council would do it again, I don't know. As I say, part of the expectation management that we do is around discussing, but not putting any concrete down, so Microsoft can't come and hang me afterwards, but discussing the on-costs of and complications of licensing. Most of the organisations that we deal with have already got Microsoft agreements in place, and they will work with their Microsoft licensing partner to make sure that they are as close to being squeaky clean as possible. But actually, having sat and looked at it, I think with the amount of remote devices coming in, the only way to really legally license this is to buy a license for every single device that's ever been manufactured, because Microsoft's license is completely, totally and utterly broken. I've got a feeling that's going to change. I think they've been very resistive to VDI as a whole because of their loss of OEM revenue, and Microsoft Office is a big revenue stream for them, and they don't have an offering available to come and fight in this market properly. No matter what people say about Hyper-V, it's still not ready for mainstream large-scale desktop. And Windows 8, I think, will be the kicker that probably changes their licensing attitude to make it probably easier for everybody, because they'll have an offering in there that they can come and play with. And at the moment, it's a case of it's my ball, and I'm going to make sure that you don't get it very easily. Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest, and there's a number of studies been done out there. There's a number of reports about cost of infrastructure, complexity, just poor deployment as well, being signalled out as one of the big reasons that VDI hasn't taken off rapidly. I'd say 80% of the people that we talk to about thin client deployments, we start off talking about VDI but end up on remote desktop services because it's significantly cheaper to deploy. And actually, there's a big place still in the market, in the real world, for remote desktop services. We've got an awful lot out there doing an awful lot of cool and funky stuff. I think, personally, the biggest blocker behind VDI's large-scale adoption at the moment is the complexity behind the licensing and the fact that Microsoft are just making it so bloody difficult. But it's their train set, they can do what they want with it, which is why I'm seeing a lot more of my customers looking at Linux desktops. But then that's another story.
Okay, Andy, thanks very much.
No worries.